Everyone, will get started in just another minute as more people sign in. Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome and welcome back to Cafe Oleh. My name is Jay Rosen. Here at Cafe Oleh with Nefesh B'Nefesh, we go over the everyday Hebrew you need here in Israel to succeed. Whether that's reading and paying your bills, going grocery shopping and reading nutritional labels, keeping up with the news, striking up a conversation, job interviewing, dating, flirting, complaining, all the everyday things you do in your native language, in your country of origin, but here in Israel in modern Hebrew. As always, we want to hear from you what topics you'd like us to cover. You can always be in touch with us by email at hebrew@nbn.org.il. If you're joining us live on Zoom, you can write to us in the chat with any questions, comments, concerns, or topic requests you may have. You can also see all of our previous lessons up on YouTube. This is not just our total channel. You can also search on YouTube for all of our previous lessons to see if we've covered a specific topic. Just go to youtube.com, type in Cafe Oleh. The first result will be a link to our playlist with over 180 past lessons. You can watch them at your leisure, totally free. Leave us a comment in the comment section. And in the description, you'll get a link to the vocabulary spreadsheet and any other resources that we include in each lesson. Likewise, you can do a free search, just like you search on Google or any other search engine online. You can type in Cafe au lait and a topic to see if we've already covered it in the past. So it's a great resource for you. We highly encourage you to use it. Finally, if you're joining us live on Zoom, we're currently at 203 participants. So first off, Toda Rabah, thank you all for joining live with us. You are welcome to ask any questions about the topic we're about to start in the Q&A. So while class is going, that's going to be the place to ask questions for me to answer at the top of the hour. I'll only be looking at the chat transcript after the fact, so please write it in the Q&A. And we ask you two very important things in the chat. Please keep personal chit chat to a minimum, folks. There are 221 of you. It is absolutely amazing how many people are committed to learning Hebrew. We are absolutely the world's largest regularly scheduled Hebrew class, and we don't take that for granted, and we hope you don't either. That does mean that for a free service, we do ask you to keep the personal chit chat to a minimum. Last week, we had some issues with that. including some very offensive comments when people asking to please keep it to a minimum as I ask you each week. If you can't do that, please excuse yourself. If you can't use the private messaging system, right? Likewise, for those of you who want to turn off the notification and you're not used to Zoom, even after all these years of using Zoom, if you see there is an arrow pointing up to the right of the chat window, chat icon, if you hover over it, and then click on that little arrow pointing up. It says show chat previews. Unclick that, and you won't get notifications popping up on your screen. This is really the last time I want to be making this comment to you. 239 adults. I know 239 people turn into a different thing than 239 individuals. Unfortunately, we've had some incidents in the last few weeks that does need to be said again. We really don't want to have to mute entirely the chat window because we do use it for our own information for the transcripts and looking afterwards. Of course, we want you to be able to converse together, but we don't want you to abuse that either. This still is a free service. With that, let's get started. Today's class is, well, it's already over here, although it may not be over where some of you are, is the Jewish holiday of Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat is also known as the New Year of the Trees. It is an important milestone in the calendar year. First off, because it's one of the 4 New Years in Israel, specifically when it comes to agricultural tithing. It's a whole other topic into it of itself. It's also the getting us out of winter because we're celebrating the process in which the spring fruits will be ripe. And exactly 1 month from now will be the next big holiday of Purim. And in another month, exactly from that, also on the full moon, will be the biggest holiday of them all, Pesach. And we're going to prepare you for all of those along the way because they're equally important in Israeli society. And we've talked about Tu B'Shvat in the past. We've had previous lessons on that, so I encourage you, if you're joining us live, to look at our YouTube channel after today's class to look at it. We're going to do something I say every time when I give the intro to class that we haven't done in a long time, which is nutrition and nutritional labels. Because if we're already talking about food and the trees, and we're celebrating trees because that's also where we get sustenance, we're going to talk about a lot of those words and how you actually read a nutritional label in Israel. And we're going to use a classic Israeli staple food, maybe not a staple food, but definitely an Israeli food as practice for reading it. At the top of the hour, in addition to answering your questions, I'm going to tell you about next week's class, and I'm going to further invite you to join us for Wednesday's class, Cafe Oleh Conversations. Whether you've joined us in the past or not, all levels are welcome to help practice your Hebrew using what we're going to go over today as the conversation prompts. With that, let's get started. Okay, so like I said today, we're going to talk about nutrition and nutritional labels. And to get started, we're going to talk about some words in general that may be very similar in meaning, but they do have a difference in application, right? I'm obviously not going to go, because we don't have the time, um, to go through all the different words used for food and cooking and things like that. We're going to focus on some big ones, especially when we talk about nutritional labels, and you'll see why in a moment. First off is the word for food, ochel. Okay, this is in general any food product, ochel. Okay, it comes from the verb le'echol, to eat. Ma'achal is another word for food. And you see all of these have the same root. We talked about this many a time. We'll continue to talk about this, that all Hebrew words are comprised of a root and a form. And the root gives us, each of those gives us 50% of the meaning. So each of these has the same root, the same shoresh of aleph, chet, lamed. No matter what letters come in between those or vowel sounds, that is the sequence. Aleph, chaf, lamed. You can see it keep happening. Aleph, chaf, lamed, right? So ochel, le'echol, ma'achal, achil, achila. You can even hear it. They all have the same sounds and thus letters. That indicates we're talking about food. Okay, so we did ochel, food, le'echol, to eat. Ma'achal is a fancier word for food, and it's usually used when we come to specific types of food, or more often in modern Israel when we're talking about a specific variety of food, or genre of food, or category of food, or ethnicity when it comes to food. Right? So, for example, you could say, Actually, both of these are used. Oh, you could say, for example, Indian food, ochel hodi or ma'achalim hodim. The difference is this is more like Indian food, ochel hodi. And if I said ma'achalim hodim, that would be like Indian dishes, specific dishes that are used, that are eaten in Indian cuisine. Okay. The adjective achil and achila, edible. And then finally, the act of eating, achila. Okay. All of these have the same root. They're already giving you 50% of the meaning. It has to do with food or the act of eating. Okay. Another root, we're not going to discuss more than these three words just to sort of get them out of the way when we're talking about different types of food. Tavshil. Tavshil really refers to a cooked dish. You'll see this on, for example, restaurant menus when it's things like, um, even though we have a separate word for stews and soups and complicated recipes, this is usually like a cooked dish, like think of with a lot of different ingredients and a lot of different things happening. Tafshil. Tafshil has the root bet shin lamed that gives us the word bishul, cooking, and the verb livashel, to cook. Okay. It also, by the way, gives us words like mivushal, which is both cooked, and bashel, which means ripe. Okay, meaning something is literally cooked on the branch or in the vine. Okay, but today we're going to use another term. And this one, some of you may be familiar with, some of you may not, but it's a very important one when we're talking about nutrition. Nutritional label is the actual words that we use for nutrition. So first off is the word mazon. Mazon, those of you with a strong Jewish educational background may know this word already. It appears in a number of prayers. It's included in Jewish sources. Mazon does mean food, but think of it more like nourishment. That's the difference between mazon and ochel. They are essentially synonyms of each other. Mazon here, ochel up here, right? They are essentially the same word. The difference is mazon is also the use of them, right? So if we said that aleph, chaf, lamed, the root of these words has to do with the actual act of eating, right? Mazon has to do more with nourishment, and that's why I wrote it here next to food. Why? Because we get the words from the same root, mezin or mezina. If something is mezin or mezina, depending on its gender, it's nourishing. And finally, the word that brings us today's title and today's topic, zuna. This is a hard word to say in Hebrew. First off, the word is nutrition. It means nutrition in Hebrew. This is the combination of the letters taf and zayin. And as you see here, there's a silent vowel. Those two dots, one on top of the other, means a silent vowel. So it is not tizuna. That is incorrect in Hebrew. Okay. I know that in certain Jewish communities in the last 2,000 years, the silent vowel becomes a sound. That is not the case in modern Hebrew. And this word is pronounced, listen very carefully. It's a hard word to say, zuna. The T and the Z basically become one sound. Z, z, zuna. Okay. Practice saying it. If that's hard for you to say, you can try to remove the taf altogether or just make it really soft. Zuna. Okay. But it is not tizuna. It is not tizuna. That is not the word we're talking about here, at least how it's pronounced in standardized modern Hebrew. It's zuna. Okay. So today we are talking about zuna, nutrition, and specifically how to read a simun tzunati. Simun tzunati. Okay, a nutrition tape label. Label. Spelled that wrong in English. Right? Label. Simun comes from the same root as siman and lissamen, which all mean siman is a sign, lissamen is to note or to is essentially to note. So simun tsunati is a nutritional signage, okay, or a sign. In this case, we would say in English, a nutrition label. Okay, just like in other countries around the world, Israel requires nutrition label to appear on all packaged foodstuffs. And it follows a very similar pattern that the rest of the world uses, specifically North America and Europe, which is where a lot of our products come from when they're not made in Israel. And even so in Israel, they have to have certain things on it. So we're going to look at one in a little bit, but first I want to go through some of the major words you're going to look at when you see a nutritional label. Remember, very important, we're talking about nutritional label. We're not going to go necessarily into ingredients. We are going to look at ingredients because that's going to be important for another part of what we're talking about today. But instead, I want you to focus on the fact we're talking about the nutritional label, not necessarily ingredients. Okay? So first off, we are going to, so I want to be sure to give you that word, rechivim. Rechivim are ingredients, whether you say rechivim, rechivim, either way is fine, but the word for ingredients, rechivim. Okay? Something that's always going to appear on the label of a foodstuff is mishkal. Remember, we talked about mishkal when it comes to linguistics and specifically Hebrew. Like I just said, 50% of a word is its shoresh, is its root. The other 50%, we talked about this a few weeks ago, is its mishkal. Mishkal are the forms that are used to create nouns and adjectives. And binyanim, which literally means buildings, is what we use to create verbs. Mishkal literally means weight, from the same root, shin kuf lamed, as shekel, right? The unit of currency in Israel, because just like all units of currency back in the day, they were actual weights. They were the equivalent of a weight that you used when you bought products. Okay? Shekel, mishkal. Let's go through some more words that you're going to see regularly on any nutritional label in Hebrew in Israel. And again, we're going to look at an example in a little bit. First off is the word sach. Sach, excuse me just 1 second. See someone got that? Good. Okay. Sach means total. Okay. You're going to see that used in a couple different ways shortly. First one, energia. Energia, I'm going to include some words that are cognates, meaning that they are from other languages that we just adopted in Hebrew. For example, energia. Energia is the same thing as calories. It may also be listed, by the way, as kaloriot, right? I'm actually going to put that here so you see that it may be the same thing. Kaloriot, and that's how it's going to look. And it's simply the word for calories. Just like in other countries around the world, they'll call it energy rather than calories, but it's the same thing in Hebrew. Okay. Shemen is oil, and shuman is fat. Okay, we've talked about these words before, but I want to put them all here on one list. Okay, shemen and shuman. Ravui is saturated, as in shuman ravui, saturated fat. Chumtza is acid. We're going to talk about this word also in a couple months from now when it comes to Pesach. If you can figure out a clue why, kol hakavod, even better. But in the meantime, know that the word for acid is chumtza. Any kind of acid, both achil, edible, and lo achil, and non-edible. Excuse me. Okay. Natran is sodium. This is not the word salt. This is the word sodium, right? Just like in Hebrew, in English, there's a difference between salt and sodium. So too in Hebrew. The element sodium is natran. Not so much from the Hebrew, right? But one word that is Hebrew, even though it's a modern term, is carbohydrates. How do we say carbohydrates in Hebrew? Pachmemot. Where is this word pachmemot come from? Pachmemot is the combination of two words, Pachman and Meman. I've talked about this before. I will continue to talk about and yes, geek out over the fact that modern Hebrew has its own words for elements. There was an argument when modern Hebrew was being codified and standardized by Eliezer ben Yehuda and his colleagues over how to create elements. Remember, this is the end of the 19th century, scientific revolution. People are all talking about science. So obviously, in an ancient language being revised, we need to know how to say these things, right? And there was a debate as to how we're going to create words for elements, things that we have used in the past, but we didn't necessarily know. And the formula that won out is what you see here, where the words end with a nun sofit, with a final nun. So just like natran is sodium, right? we have pachman and meiman. Where do these words come from? Pachman, for carbon, right, comes from the same root as the word pecham. Pecham is coal or charcoal, right? For example, in Israel, the largest Muslim city, the largest Muslim majority city is called El Fahim. Fahim is just the Arabic way of saying pecham. Why? And it literally translates to the mother of all charcoal, because in El Fahim they used to create pecham, coals, charcoals, particularly from trees, right? Which is one of the traditional ways you make charcoal. And pecham is certainly something that we've had in for thousands of years in Jewish tradition. For example, burning incense at the temple, right? Pechamim are coals, right? Pecham is a coal, charcoal. So from that we get the word pachman, carbon, because what is charcoal but simply carbon? And then we have the word meiman. Meiman is hydrogen coming from maim, right? Because what is maim but hydrogen and oxygen? So together we put the words for carbon and hydrogen, which is what a carbohydrate is. Carbohydrate, carbon, hydrogen, pachmemot, right? As a mush of the two words together, pachmemot is how we say carbohydrates in modern Hebrew. I think that's pretty creative to say the least. Okay. One of the many things, obviously, that will appear on a nutritional label, pachmemot. Let's look at some other things. Sivim, fiber, important. Chelbon, protein. Barzel, iron. And vitamin, vitamins. Okay, I didn't include some other words on here. For example, sukal. Sukal would go under carbohydrates. Obviously, sukal is sugar, right? You know what I'm talking about. And then, because I know my audience well, also talk about sensitivities and allergies, right? How do we say those two things? Sensitive is ragish and regisha, coming from the same root that we use to talk about our feelings. We also use when it comes to physical sensitivity, or in the case of food allergies or sensitivities more specifically. Ragish, regisha, regishim, regishot is the adjective, and the act of being sensitive, i.e. sensitivity, regishut. Okay, and you're going to learn how to use those in just a second and be able to practice them on Wednesday. Allergie, allergit. Okay, simply allergic. As opposed to being sensitive, now you're flat out allergic. So allergie, allergit. And an allergy is an allergia. Okay, another cognate that we use all the time. What are some of the common ones? Please don't come at me in the comments with, can you tell me how to say my food allergy in Hebrew? First off, as we say online, TMI, too much information. We don't disclose our medical issues, but we are going to learn together how to say it when it comes to important things. For example, when you're ordering in a restaurant. Good practice on Wednesday, another call out, shout out to join us on Wednesdays. Okay, but I just listed some of the big ones. It's clearly not all of them. Again, if you have specific ones that you can't find in a dictionary, and I challenge you not to find the words that you need in a dictionary, but if that's the case, you can always be in touch with me. Okay. Mutzrei chalav. Okay. Mutzrei chalav, dairy products. Okay. Mutzar is a product. Mutzrei chalav, dairy products, literally milk products, but this refers to all dairy products if you have that kind of sensitivity or allergy. Kitniot, we know that word coming from a holiday coming up a little bit. Kitniot are legumes, so anything like beans, lentils, rice, corn, so forth. Egoze etz, tree nuts. Egoz is a nut, etz is a tree, so nuts of a tree, tree nuts. And of course, one that I'm sure people are already texting me about in the comments, so let me already cut you to the chase. This one is also a good cognate. Gluten. Gluten is simply gluten. Okay, is gluten. Okay, some of the big ones again: If you can't find a word, please first look in a dictionary, folks. We've given you a lot of resources over the years on how to find words with better resources than Google Translate. Please look them up. If you can't find the word that helps you with your sensitivity, you're welcome to be in touch with us, but please do the initial research on your own. Okay. And speaking of which, we're going to give you the words that you need to talk about if you have a food allergy, for example, ordering in a restaurant. Typically nowadays in Israel, people will ask, the waiter or waitress will ask you as they're taking your order, יש למישהו רגישות או אלרגיה למשהו? יש, is there, למישהו, to someone, meaning at this table when they're looking at you making your order, רגישות, sensitivity, one of our new words, או אלרגיה, or an allergy, למשהו, to something. Okay, so they're going to ask you, יש למישהו רגישות או אלרגיה למשהו? That's how it's going to sound in Hebrew. And you're going to answer, if you do have something, one of three ways. כן, אני אלרגי or אני אלרגית, depending on your gender, אלרגי masculine, אלרגית feminine, ל, I am allergic to, and then you fill in the blank. Or כן, יש לי אלרגיה ל, yes, I have an allergy to. So here you're not, this is gender inclusive. We're just saying I have an allergy to something. And then finally, כן, אני לא אוכל, or אני לא אוכלת, depending on your gender. I do not eat. We're conjugating the verb לאכול, to eat. So I do not eat, and then you fill in the blank. Okay, so on Wednesday, you're going to be practicing this, especially those of you at a beginner and intermediate level. Basic, but very important and vital Hebrew, of course, right? Now, let's throw you in the deep end, as it were, and I'm going to show you a food label, and we're going to read it together. Let's do you. Let's see if it'll let me do both at the same time. Probably not. Let's just make sure. Let me try if it'll let me. Nope, I don't like that. Okay, we're going to look at it together. And like I said, you're going to get a copy of the spreadsheet just like every week together. We're going to look at the label once, and then you'll be able, once you have the spreadsheet in front of you as an attachment, or if you screenshot it already, to be able to look at virtually any nutritional label that exists. So we're going to look at a classic one. And if you know this one, great. If you don't know this one, with its classic orange background, even without seeing the name of the product, this is the Simun Tsunati, the nutritional label for bamba, right? And thinking, what is a classic Israeli food that you wouldn't necessarily know what's in it? We are going to look at the ingredients as well, but first let's look at the nutritional value. Okay, so a couple things here. First off, you'll see right under it says Simun Tsunati here at the top in this blue band here. It says ב-100 gram mazon. So ב means in, 100 gram, 100 grams of mazon, of food, of nourishment, right? That word again, mazon, right? So this is going to be telling you what is the nutritional value per 100 grams. Remember, Israel, like the vast majority of the world, uses metric. So we're talking about grams here, unless indicated otherwise, which I'll show you. First off, the first line, energia, and then in parentheses, kaloriot. Okay. Just as we talked about already, meaning calories. So it's telling you that there are 534 calories per 100 grams. Okay. Sach hashumanim, remember that word sach, total of shumanim, fats, measured in that gimel there indicates gram. So the total amount of fats in this are 30 grams. Tocham, of which, right? And now it's going to break it down. And even if you didn't know the word mitocham, look at the actual packaging. You see how it's indented, meaning that everything follows under it. we use indentation in Hebrew just like we do in English, right? So it's telling you, it's going to give you a breakdown of what the fat is, right? Of that 30 grams, right? It's going to tell you that 3.9 of it, 3.9 grams are chumtzot shuman ravuyot, excuse me, right? So chumtza was acid, shuman fat, ravui saturated fatty acids, okay? Saturated fatty acids, of which there are 3.9 grams. Chumtzot shuman trans, the next line down. So chumtzot, acid, shuman, fat, trans is simply English, trans. So trans fatty acids, of which there are less than pachot mi 0.5. There's less than 0.5 grams of trans fatty acids. Okay, next line down, cholesterol. If it's a long word in Hebrew, folks, it usually means that it's a foreign word. Cholesterol is here measured in milligrams, of which it is 0. Natran, right? Natran, we talked about, is sodium, measured in mem gimel. If gimel was grams, what do you think mem gimel is? Milligrams. Okay, so there are 390 milligrams per 100 grams of food. Stach hapachmimot, total of pachmimot, carbohydrates, measured in grams, 49 grams of carbohydrates, mitochan, of which sukar, in this case sukarim, sugars, are 3.5 grams. Kapiot sukar, how many teaspoons of sugar? 0.75. Okay, so it's telling us what kind of sugar is in this. Without looking at the ingredients, it's not necessarily direct sugar, it's probably from another source. And then chalbonim. Chalbonim is protein. We said chalbon is protein, so proteins measured in grams, 17 grams of protein. Okay, good source of protein. And then, right, now we see a whole bunch of other things. First off, even if you couldn't read this, folks, this first word here, even though we just covered it, look at what follows it in Latin letters. I see an A, E, B1, B3, B6, further down B12, B, and C. I want you to practice using some logic. Instead of having to go to a dictionary every single time you see a word, use some logic. Step back, take a deep breath, and say, I'm looking at a food product. This first word I may not be able to read, but I'm seeing A, E, B1, B3, B6, B12, C. What do those letters have to do with food? Vitamins, right? Vitamin, and then it's telling you how many, right, of all the different vitamins that are in it. And it's giving you in the parentheses how much. So this first one, for example, vitamin A, vitamin A, or vitamin A, however you want to pronounce it. It says it's in Mem Kuf Gimel. What do you think that means? All right. It's the smallest amount of micrograms that you can possibly measure things in, right? This is micrograms, not milligrams. This is micrograms. The next one, mem gimel, is milligrams, right? And it keeps going down with milligrams or micrograms, depending if it's mem kuf gimel or mem gimel. It's also telling you in parentheses what the specific name of the vitamin is. So when you get to, for example, vitamin B1, vitamin B1, it's also thiamine, vitamin B3, vitamin B3 is also known as niacin, and so forth. You also have chumtza, remember a word for acid, and then this word. Think about if you're talking about vitamins, what is a typical acid that you include in this? Folic acid. Chumtza folit, folic acid. Vitamin B12, vitamin C, and then finally barzel. Barzel, iron. Okay, so you have just read the nutritional value, not ingredients, remember, nutritional value. It's going to be more or less in this listing. especially for a fruit product like Bamba, where it's important that they show the nutritional value of eating what's otherwise a snack, right? Because of how much protein there is in it, and so forth, and all the different vitamins it comes with. Okay. Before I jump to your questions, I want to show you what the ingredients look like, just so you also have that here. Right? So if the nutritional label is on the bottom right, this is the top left of the back of a bag of Bamba, and it says at the top, Chatif Botnim, a peanut snack, and then that bar says Rechivim, right? Our word for ingredients. So let's go through it together, including the allergy warning right under it. It says Botnim Tchunim, the first thing at the top of the these four lines at the bottom top right. Botnim Tchunim. Botnim are peanuts. Tachun is from the same root as the word techina. Many of you know techina, you use it on a regular basis, right? Techina is ground sesame paste. It comes from the word for ground or grinding. So if something is tachun, it's ground. In this case, botnim tchunim, ground peanuts, constituting 54% of the product. Grise tiras. Okay, those of you who know what Bamba is made out of, it's pretty much two things. The first one, we know the flavor now, right? You know Bamba well, that it's peanut flavored, so that takes care of the botnim tchunim. Now, the other part that makes up the most of it, grise tiras. Tiras is corn. Grise tiras. Grise tiras, it sounds like the word that we use actually in English for this, grits. Grisim comes from the same root as the verb ligros. Any of you who've been here in Israel in the summer may have once ordered a limonana garus, right? Limonana is that great combination of lemon and mint. And garus often is the word that we use for shredded, right? Something that is torn apart into small bits. For example, you may have in your office a mechonat grisa, a shredder, a shredding machine in your office. Grise tiras are grits, not grits that you cook in the South, rather small particles of corn. Okay, so already we know the two big ingredients because just like in other countries, it's listed from the biggest ingredient in the food stuff to the smallest. So botnim tchunim, ground peanuts, grise tiras, cornmeal, you could also think of it as. Shemen, our word oil. Chamniyot, excuse me. Shemen chamniyot, sunflower oil, safflower oil, it's also known as. Melach, the beginning of the next line, melach, salt. Vitaminim, our word again, vitamins, right? And it's telling you all the different vitamins that are in it. Vitamin C, vitamin B3, vitamin E, vitamin B1, vitamin B6, right? And blah, 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 blah. The idea of Bamba, of course, is meant to be a nutritious snack, a chatif mazin. Chatif meaning the word snack, and of course, our word mazin, nutritious, that we had in our vocabulary, right? So we have all these different vitamins that are included, and at the end, barzel, iron. And then it says here, Meda al rechivim allergenim. Information, Meda al, on, rechivim, ingredients that are allergens, allergenim, right? And then it says, Mechil botnim, contains, Mechil botnim, peanuts. And then it says under that, Alul lehachil soya. It is likely or liable, alul, lehachil, to include soy. Okay? So now you read the entire nutritional value of a Bamba package, right? Quintessential Israeli snack. It says under it, by the way, about a choking hazard for babies and only to be eaten by an adult, in supervision of an adult, but that has nothing to do with the nutrition, just the actual shape of it. Okay, so already you have the gist of almost every product there is out there and how to read the nutritional label. Ingredients obviously are going to change. But this is not. It may not look exactly like this, but first off, all products that are made by Osem, as you see here, Osem's label, which is one of Israel's biggest food concerns, will look like this. Excuse me. And second, it will be listed more or less in the same order, starting with calories, going down from there into fats, cholesterol, sugar, protein, and sodium, and so forth. Okay. So I see we have a bunch of questions, but I once again wanted to share with you, right, this vocab list, which again, on Wednesday's class, you're going to be talking not just about answering these questions together, right, and finding the language to describe if you or someone you know has a food allergy or food sensitivity. We'll also be using words like, for example, mezin, right? Mezin is very important, nourishing. Because especially when we're moving to a new country, even if we've been to Israel multiple times, for example, if you've been to Israel multiple times, but you've always stayed in a hotel, what about having to cook for yourself? How will you know if something that you're cooking is mezin or buying is mezin, is nourishing, right? Meaning that it's also healthy for you. It's not just filling you up, but it's also healthy. So we're going to go over those words together. In Wednesday's class, you'll get a copy of those um, conversation prompts at least 24 hours in advance of Wednesday's class. So if you are not already signed up for Cafe Oleh Conversations, meaning you haven't done it at least once in the last several weeks, please make sure to do so if you'd like to join us. Let me answer some questions already in the chat. Actually, I'm going to wait to answer Q&A in just 1 second. In addition to Wednesday's class, I want to tell you about next week's class because next week's class is probably the most important one that we're going to do this season. I think they're all important, but I know this one is a big one. Next week, we're going to go over again how to read Hebrew without vowels, specifically the dots and bars that we call nikud, which indicate vowel sounds. This is an incredibly, incredibly important class for all levels, especially for those of you at a beginner's level who find it very frustrating when you don't see them there, and also how to feel more confident reading Hebrew in general. And for those of you at a more advanced level to reinforce what you've learned and maybe pick up some new clues and new tricks as to how to read without Nikud. Next week is a really important lesson for all levels. I promise all levels will be welcome when we talk about how to read without Nikud. Nikud, the dots and bars that indicate vowel sounds, folks, are the equivalent of training wheels on your bike. At some point, they have to go away. Next week, we're going to learn all sorts of ways to be able to do that faster than learning in more traditional forms of modern Hebrew. Let me get to some questions. Should z be pronounced like ts? Nope. Otherwise, it would be spelled the same way. Great question. Someone asked in the Q&A, well, wait a minute, Jay. You just said for the word for nutrition is zuna, right? So why shouldn't it be pronounced ts? Folks, we have a whole separate letter called tsadi, and that is best transliterated as ts without this apostrophe. You notice specifically I wrote this apostrophe and spelled it correctly. Taf and zayin together do not create the sound that the letter tsadi makes. Tsadi is ts, ts. Taf and zayin together at the beginning of the word for nutrition is zuna. It's a different sound. It may not sound like it to you, but it has to be pronounced differently. Hebrew spelling is destiny. You cannot spell things differently, and you have to pronounce it accordingly. Okay. How do you say a dietitian or nutritionist? Great question. So you will hear people call themselves a tsunai or tsunai, right? Zunat, zunai. I'll get back to you on that, but people call themselves all sorts of different things, but it comes from the same root as zuna. May I use sach in the form of a question to be brief and quick at a coffee place? For example, instead of kama ze oleh? No. Great question. If you want to be brief when asking how much something is, just say kama or kama ze. How much is it? You do not say kama ze oleh. In fact, you will not hear In everyday conversation, native Hebrew speakers say kamazel. That's a thing you learn in Ulpan that is not used in everyday Hebrew. We've talked about those words before. That's a great example of one. You simply say kama or kamazeh. How much or how much is this? Okay, that's how you say it. You're not going to use the word sach. Great question. Does the gender of ragish, regisha go with the person who has the allergy or the gender of the food that causes the reaction? Great question, right? What are you talking about? If you're saying I am sensitive, right? Then it's about the person. Ani ragish, I am sensitive. He regisha, she is sensitive. Okay, it's not about the food that we're talking about. It's about the person speaking. I am sensitive to something. Okay, or she is, and so forth. Okay. I see people with a lot of dietary needs and restrictions. Let me get to as many as I can without getting, as I said, into TMI here. Okay. How many servings per package? Great question. If it says on there how many servings per package, sometimes it will say that, sometimes it will not. That's not necessarily a required thing in Israel to include. I see several people asking that question. It is not necessarily required in Israel to provide servings per package, also because that changes based on someone's needs and how many people they're feeding and so forth like that. So that's not necessarily a required thing that in other countries it is to include. All right. I see a bunch of you asking that question. Great. Okay, a couple things for people to add. Words that you can easily look up, I'm not going to include. For example, vegan and vegetarian. Those words are readily found online and on online dictionaries. I am, however, going to include some things that aren't straight, that are not straight translations. So, for example, we got to mutzrei chalav, dairy products. If you want to say that you want something, if you're looking for a product, for example, that is free of any of these things, you are not going to use the word free. Okay. In English, we would say, for example, gluten free or lactose free or sugar free or salt free or tree nut free, right? You saw on the label of Bamba, it said mechil, contains. So sometimes it'll say mechil and lo mechil, right? Contains and doesn't contain. Okay. But if you're looking for the same thing, for example, if you're looking for lactose-free milk or gluten-free snacks or something like that, you're going to look for the word natul. Natul is the equivalent in English of free. Okay. Natul, and then it's followed by the word. So for example, if I'm looking for lactose-free milk, chalav, milk, natul lactose. Okay. For example, chalav, natul lactose. Okay. We only use this word natul when it comes in this context. We don't use it in other contexts that mean free, other than we're talking about it does not contain something, right? Lactose free milk. Okay. And the same goes for a gluten-free product, natul gluten. Okay. Natul. Okay. More questions in the Q&A. But if I wanted to say I have a food sensitivity to, wouldn't you say, how would you say it? I taught you the word for sensitivity, right? And you know how to say I have, put them two together. So instead of I have an allergy, swap out the word allergy. Folks, I'm not saying people's names here. I want you to use a little bit of common sense when learning a language. I know you want me to teach you everything one-on-one. I'm trusting you to read this. Instead of saying yesh li allergia, I have an allergy, you can say yesh li regishut. You can say yesh li to anything under the sun, right? I want you to plug these in for yourself. Yesh li allergia, I have an allergy. Yesh li regishut, I have sensitivity to. Okay, great questions. Let's keep going. What's the rationale for quantifying everything by 100 grams or 100 milliliters? We use the metric system in Israel, and that is considered a base form not just of purchasing things, but also paying for things and weighing things out. That's the rationale as far as I understand. Does Sachakol mean grand total or in summary? Yes. Sachakol is often written at the end of a bill. For example, if you're eating out, and it'll often say at the end of the meal, this. Or abbreviated as, and this is the grand total. Right? So for example, if you're eating at a restaurant and they have to add in, for example, ma'am, value-added tax, or any other surcharges, it'll have the total and then it'll have sachakol, the total sum or grand total, right? Is another way to think about this, grand total or total sum, sachakol. Is the word sensitive used to describe an emotional person? I already explained that and I said yes. Is there a Hebrew word for parv? Yep. Guess what it is, folks? Parve. Okay. Parve is the word. It originally comes from Hebrew, but the word is parve. That is just pronounced differently. Does natul also mean decaf? No. Natul means free. Once you add a word after it, it will mean that. So if you want to say decaffeinated, natul caffeine, caffeine-free coffee or caffeine-free soda. How about using bli, as in bli gluten? You can use the word bli without, and that makes total sense. I'm telling you what you're going to see on a label, which is going to say natul gluten or natul lactose. It may say bli gluten, but I promise you it's going to usually say natul. That's the word that we use, as in gluten-free. How do you say goat milk or sheep milk or cow milk? Milk followed by the animal. Okay, so for example, Chalav izim. Chalav is milk, izim are goats. That's how you're going to say a specific animal's goat, animal's milk, rather. Yogurt is yogurt. Okay. Again, folks, please trust yourselves. Look these words up. We have some great free dictionaries out there that are not Google Translate. We have a whole lesson on it. Please look it up. I will tell you them again. Context Reverso and Milon Morphix. Look them up on your own. You can find a lot of the words that people are asking about in the comments. They're on your own. The sales clerk and I were looking at the nutritional label for a package of cookies, but it was given for 100 grams, and we couldn't figure out how many cookies were inside the package, so you would know what the amount was per cookie. Again, that is a common thing in the United States and other countries to tell you a suggested serving size. Remember, folks, it's a suggested serving size. Israel will not necessarily include that on its nutritional label packaging. That's definitely a cultural difference, but that's not there. And if it's not there, you can you can do some complicated math on the total weight of something and then the nutritional value based on 100 grams or milliliters. But I think they're saying you do you in terms of rationing out food. Can we say bli lactose? Again, folks, you can say a lot of things under the sun. Let me make this again abundantly clear, because I know this is a common question we get in Cafe Oleh and in general when you're learning a new language. Well, wait a minute, Jay, can't you say this? You can say a lot of things, folks. You can say bli lactose, and that means without lactose. That is not, listen to me very carefully, folks, because several of you are asking this question. That is not what's going to appear on the label. If you go right now to your neighborhood makolet, your neighborhood grocery store, and you're looking for lactose-free milk, it is not going to say on the carton, chalav bli lactose. It's going to say chalav natul lactose. So what I'm teaching you is not high level Hebrew, it's what you're going to hear and see and speak on a regular basis. Yes, you'll be understood if you say chalav bli lactose, but if you are putting a lot of weight on that one word bli, which means without, and you get to the store and you don't see that word, I don't want you to get all flustered, especially that I'm telling you, you're likely going to see chalav natul lactose. Same thing with the word lelo, folks. I love you. I love that you have these vocabulary words. That is not what's going to appear on the vast majority of labels, right? That is a lot of what we do here in Cafe Oleh is preparing you for everyday life here in Israel, right? Setting you up to succeed in Israel, part of the shtick at the beginning of class. Okay. What is the word dal? Dal is low. That's a great question. Let me add that here because that is a different word altogether. So if we say natul lactose, we can also say, sorry, we can also say dal. Dal is low, as in low fat. Dal, as in dal shuman, means low fat. Dal sukar, low sugar. Dal natran, low sodium. Okay, great question. So natul dash means blank free in English. Dal blank means low dash. Okay, so dal shuman, low fat. Okay. One more question about sachakol. Is it used for in conclusion? No. Sachakol means grand total, as in a quantifiable thing. Great question. What is the difference between achila and ochel ochelet? Ochel ochelet. Achila is the act of eating. In Hebrew, that is a very common form of a verb. In English, we call that the verbal noun or gerund. We've had lots of lessons talking about this. That is the act of eating, as in I am eating, or eating vegetables is good for you. Eating vegetables is good for you versus I eat vegetables. What's the difference? One is the verbal noun, eating, and one is conjugated, I eat, you eat, we eat, she eats, he eats. Okay. Okay, I see we have a couple more questions. I'm going to add some more words that I see a lot of you are asking a lot of questions about dietary restrictions, and that's great. I'm really glad that you are prepping yourselves to live in Israel. I can't obviously answer all of them. I'm certainly not going to go into kashrut. Kashrut is its own beast, and frankly, a lot of it presupposes you have a certain level of Hebrew knowledge. If that's a specific interest, you can email me separately, but I will go over things like, for example, no added sugar, right? We will go over that. And I'm going to give you a bonus in the uh, description of this class that will go up in the next day or two. I'm going to give you the signage that Misrad HaBriut, the Israeli Health Ministry, has put out that some of you may have seen of 3 red circles that go on certain foods that tell you that these foods have specific high amounts of fat, sugar, and or salt. You now have all the words, all the words to understand what that means. In fact, I'm going to actually share with you what it looks like on Google search, because you now have literally all the words at your disposal to understand what those red circles mean, right? I'm obviously going to give this to you as in addition, as a website to look at on your own. But here is an AI generated summary of it. And you now have all the words to know natran, right? Sukar and Shuman Ravui. And now you can read all of the different things that are in it with regards to how much it needs to be in it to constitute getting one of those red dots, red circles. The red circles, for those of you who are not familiar with that, is a uh, initiative by the Israeli Health Ministry for some years now to mark products with significant high levels of fat, sugar, and or salt. What those levels are is what I just showed you, and I'll send that to you in a link as well, along with the description, along with the spreadsheet that we looked at, and yes, the pictures of the Bamba nutritional values that you'll be able to read it on your own. Wednesday's class, we're going to answer in our groups if you have sensitivities or allergies, practicing asking each other that, as well as other questions with regards to nutrition, health, food in general. That's going to be Wednesday's Cafe Oleh conversation. Highly recommend all of you to join us. Next week's class, How to Read Hebrew Without Vowels, the ultimate guide, how to do it at any proficiency level. With that, Toda Rabah, thank you all for joining. This class will be up on YouTube in the next day or so. Until I see you on Wednesday or next Monday, Toda Rabah, v'leitrot. See you all very soon.